So an interesting problem that I proposed in class today, or I was thinking about, was, I mean, do you think 90 years old is actually old? Um, and the funny thing is a lot of people think like 90 years old is old, or 80 is old. But if you start looking at how do you actually build wealth, or how do you actually do things that are really spectacular, there's a really simple formula, right? Is you do things that compound over time, that have compound interest over time, and you do that for decades and decades and decades, right? Until you're 90 years old. And there's this really amazing thing. I want you to look it up. And it's a mutual fund company that does this. It's American Funds. They've been around forever. They have I don't know, mutual funds that are like 80 years old or something. It's just ridiculous. They've been around for a long time. They're pretty good. They're not like conservative, but they do a good job. They're a very good company. Um, so they have this chart that starts out how much you would, just before the Great Depression, how much you would end up having if you invested $10,000. So just before the Great Depression, you had invested $10,000, and then you compound that years and years and years and years and years until today in terms of how much money you'd actually have. Um, Wow, and just driving by a couple of llamas on the yeah, it's kind of interesting. I don't see that every day. Sidetrack. Okay, so how much money would you actually have? A lot of people think, oh, maybe you'll have $100,000 by the time you get to like today. Um, and people are just patently way off with it. The amount of money you'd actually have, and if you look this up, it's true, like this is the real deal, you'd have $200 million to your name. And so to get to that $200 million, you have to invest for 90 years. You have to invest. And at that time, if you think about it, you're like, oh, some of you are really smart and astute. You might be thinking, well, $10,000 was a lot of money at that time. It was, but in terms of inflation adjusted, so how much an equivalent would be today, it would be $200,000. So if you had $200,000 and you let it sit there for 90 years, properly invested, doing all the right things, you would have $200 million. Now, do you think that there's other things in this world that compound in that same sort of way? Things like education, things like just your family, or well-being, all sorts of different things. Absolutely, there is, right? Like there is a lot, but people don't understand. They don't sort of comprehend. It's not about what happens over the next year, right? Like all this investment advice that you see, almost all of it is total garbage, right? Because the investment is how much can you invest today of your time, energy, whatever, resources, whatever, right? It doesn't have to be investing in stocks. Can be investing in relationships, but how much can you invest today and do that for 90 years? And if you look at that and you start comprehending what that means, right? Like 90 years is a long time, but if you did that, you'd have $200 million of just sheer financial resources. Do you know what you could do with $200 million to your name? Like how much good you could do, right? So that means if you properly invest it, you do it for 90 years in the last 10 years of your life. I know that this is still a little wonky. I realize the ages and stuff are a little wonky, but you do that for the last 10 years of your life. You just give away interest that you get, and the interest is going to be about 10% on that. So 10% on $200 million is $20 million. Can you imagine if you gave away $20 million in your city every single year? Like how cool that was. It would be like, it would feel unlimited, right? Like the amount of resources that you can give and to do really fun things, and you still have, at the end of that, you'd still have $200 million, which is phenomenal, right? The whole thing, if you start thinking about it, you take a step back and you realize, like, holy crap, what the heck am I doing with my time? How come I'm not doing things that compound over that time? You realize, most people at the end of their life, they have nothing to their name, right? Like, that's a typical human being. And the reason is they're thinking short term. And I'm not saying, like, you might be thinking, well, you live in America, blah, 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 you're wealthy and blah. No, this is like normal everyday stuff. You look for things that compound in your life, whatever that is, and you pursue those things for decades and decades and decades. And you will have this amazing, really cool thing that goes on in your life, right? Like that you have this unbelievable amount of growth. And it doesn't happen until decades and decades and decades that you reap the benefits, right? One of the ones that I've picked up is, social media and all that kind of stuff, right? Like these podcasts, they compound, right? They compound and they turn into something miraculous over many, 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 many years, and it's just beginning, right? Like the sort of compounding of this. Like, how cool is it going to be 20 years from now, you'll listen to me saying the exact same thing. I'll say, hey, listen to this podcast back from the day. And it will be the same thing that I'm telling you today. And by then, I'll have 100,000 listeners just on this podcast alone, probably 1 million listeners on this podcast, just somebody listening and sort of seeing the all of this, and then you look back and you say, hey, isn't that was pretty cool, right? Like, that's forecastable. All of these things are forecastable because you're looking at things that compound and that turn into really cool, amazing things over the course of many, 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 many years. And this took me a long time to figure out, right? Like, it's not something that I figured out instantaneously, but it's something that I figured out as I got into this. I started realizing, like, crap, there's lots of things in our lives that compound and turn into really cool things. Why aren't we pursuing those things more today? And the simple thing is that we're human beings. We sort of do things that are short term, and we don't see these sort of longer term benefits. So I want you to think about this. What can you do by the time that you're 90 years old that will turn into $200 million? Yes, investments and all that kind of stuff. But if you listen to what I say, if you invest, anywhere between 10 to 20% of everything you ever make into index funds that are based in the S&P 500 index, or mutual funds that are well diversified, that are based on good companies, you'll have ridiculous amounts of money. But it's going to take you 60, 70 years to get there to have that ridiculous amount of money. But you could do other things in your life that have the same thing. And what do you want to do in terms of turning that into something that's truly amazing? I want you to think about that and start pursuing those things. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.